Hey guys, I'm wearing once again today my Madame Defarge's knitting school cutting edge and revolutionary established 1775 t-shirt. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to read to you about Madame Lafarge at the end of this podcast. And she got a bum rap, let me tell you. Gonna start with a finished sock. I finished the first sock for March socks. These are Sporty stripes, and this yarn is the Earth URTH sock set in the colorway Hanukkah, which I'm using because blue and white were my school colors in high school and college. So, but can you believe I started this sock Saturday afternoon and I finished it today, Wednesday. So 5-day sock, size 1 needles, done. The stripes really do keep you going. Like, oh, I want to get to that blue again, and you just keep going. And plus, stress knitting. If you're not stress knitting these days, I don't know. Uh, but yeah, no, this is fun yarn, and I'm also using new needles. I think I have some of these in double pointed, but these are the Knit Pro double pointed. I think I have some circulars in this, but Knit Pro, these are 6-inch size 1 needles, and partly because I'm sure because they're new, but also they're just really smooth and sharp. I have stopped buying Unique Sock in the past because it's so splitty, but I did pretty well. There were some times when it went a little splitty on me, but with these needles, it was okay. And as you can tell, I finished sock in 5 days. So March 24th to 31st is the last week, the last 8 days of March. That will be second sock week, where we all work on our second sock of the month, or whatever second sock you have in your UFO pile, however it works. Just it's second sock week every month at the end of the week. That's Olive, by the way. He's looking at squirrels. We've had rain and snow and rain and snow and rain and snow all day, and now it's just cold, and I think the birds are coming out to get their seed. We dump seed on the front porch, so he's looking out at that. Today is also Ash Wednesday, and happy Ash Wednesday to everybody, right? It is the beginning of Lent, and I don't feel the need to get all churchy on this podcast. But if you're like me, you have a bunch of blankets sitting around, and I decided that I was going to work on blankets for Lent, because it's a 40-day period that is measurable, and I can take. It's kind of a time to take off and stop doing something or do something different for a period of time, whether you give up sugar or stop watching crap TV or put your phone away or whatever it is. For me, working on blankets is a thing that I don't ordinarily want to do. And so it's a good time to do that. And so from today, March 5th until April 20th, which is Easter, I'm going to be working on blankets. And the hashtag is blanket KAL 4 Lent, number 4 Lent. I'm using that on Blue Sky, and I also have and I will link it below, the Ravelry group for 2025 Year of the UFO. That group is also, there's a place you can share your blankets. You may have heard of the Loose Ends Project, where volunteers will take on an unfinished project from someone that has passed away and finish it for the family. And it's very meaningful to many family members. If grandma or grandpa knit or made something, they do embroidery as well, to finish that project so that that heirloom is with the family completed. I have signed up to do that, but I've never heard back from them because they have a great many volunteers working for them. So On the other hand, I belong to a church group called Stitch and Go, where we have achieved enough local publicity that everyone who has a crafter who has passed away in their family, it seems, in Springfield, Illinois, drops off their stuff. And so we've actually had a woman reach out to us. I have a lot of what I'm saying is I have a lot of unfinished projects that are not mine that came from Stitch and Go. But we had one woman send us or write to us and ask if we could finish a blanket that her mother made. And it illustrates a point. So bear with me. She had 2 blankets. Grandma made a blue granny square blanket, twin-sized bed for the first child, who was a boy. It was blue. It's a granny square that has a bigger double-sized granny square medallion in the middle of it. And then she started one for second child, who was a girl, that was pink, and never finished it. And what this woman had, whose mother made these for her daughter, was 9 of these. Very nicely done granny squares. She had 9 of them, and no center medallion, and not enough yarn to finish the blanket. And she reached out to Stitch and Go and said, look, I might be able to get more yarn. I might be able to, maybe we can just rework the yarn that I have to make something. This was, as all things knit and crochet in this group are, was forwarded to me. And I'm honored to do it. But the people who forwarded it to me said, you're under no obligation. This looks like a lot of work. And I looked at it, and this woman emailed pictures of the blue blanket that was completed and what was left of this, and said, here's how much yarn I have, and maybe we can get more, and maybe we can't, and maybe we can slightly match it. And I was just like, stop. What we need to do is take what your mother has made. And I always do this when I'm given a bag of unfinished squares or whatever, it's knitting. Always start with what is finished by the person and see if you can construct it into something. And so since there are 9 of these, we're going to trash the idea of a twin size blanket, and we're going to sew these together. I'm going to sew these together as a 3x3 baby blanket with a border that matches the border of the blue blanket, because I have a photograph of that. And she has sent me these 9. There's 9 of these. There is enough of this dark yarn to sew them together and to do a border of some kind. It's a single crochet border on the blue blanket. I can do that also. And it will be completely, the body of the blanket minus the border will be completely knit or crocheted, by Grandma. And the fact that it is not stitch for stitch matching the other blanket doesn't matter, because it's Grandma's blanket. And that proposal really opened the thought of the woman that was sending this, and said, oh yeah, that's really a good idea. It'll be a good crib blanket. I said it's a great car seat blanket too. Boy, small blankets for car seats that are washable is great. And when you talk about trying to find acrylic yarn from whenever this was to match, forget it. I mean, that's just pointless. So that's, and because this one specifically has a person waiting for it, and I told them I would have this done by April, this is number 1 on the list to finish. The other ones that are also early on the list are also ones that I did not start. And this is not an unselfish task for me. This is to get them out of my house. By the way, this is a project bag. Maybe I've shown this before. It's got little Jeeps driving up and down a forest and mountains. I made this for Sock Week last year, when Nitty Natty's theme was the great outdoors. And so this is actually a project bag big enough for a blanket, but I always make a little project bag to go along with the theme of Sock Week, primarily because she um, has project bags for sale from vendors, from Etsy vendors, and they're a little out of my price range, so I make my own to go with the theme. All right, so this is a feather and fan baby blanket that one of the people at Stitch and Go, who I know, started. I think she said 30 years ago, and I linked to a free feather and fan project that you can pick up and knit. This is the part that she knit. It is baby yarn held double on size 7 needles, and I tried to knit a row of it, and it is just too tight. And I've noticed this a lot from some of these projects that are left over that were abandoned by people who passed away, is that there was a trend at one point in the 70s and 80s where knitting blankets at an incredibly tight gauge was the thing. And so I am pulling this out and knitting as I go a size 10, same yarn, held double, just pulling it out and knitting it again on 10s. And it just is, it can breathe, it can scrunch, and it's still pretty. And you can see the difference between 7 and 10s for holding yarn double is quite a bit. And it's a looser blanket with a little bit of give to it. So this is next, I think. Feather and fan is easy to do, and like I said, it's on 10s. So once I get those squares done, I'm gonna polish this off. All right, I have some more squares to show you. These are squares from that I've shown you before. These were in the big bag that came from church, and these are 7x9 squares and they are for the Warm Up America project. Warm Up America, I've been reading their website today, likes to receive 7x9 squares. They want the ends worked in, so I will probably work the ends in on these before I ship them. She cut them off too small, too. 2 inches. It would be nice to have a little bit more to work in, but I'll work these in and send them to Texas. They will also take completed blankets of any variety, as long as they're machine washable. So if you have some machine washable blankets halfway done and haven't finished them because you don't know what to do with them, first of all, they encourage finding a local outlet, either a church mission. I do suggest calling around to the United Methodist churches in your area, because they often have mission projects where they'll take them. We at Laurel United Methodist Church have a diaper depot where we give away diapers on a regular basis, and with that, we will give away baby blankets if there are any available. And we also sell blankets at our rummage sales that we do to raise money so that we can buy more materials to make things for cancer patients and for nursing home residents and so forth. So in any event, this is going to go to Warm Up America. They will combine it with other yarns and other squares and make blankets for homeless people, and they have all kinds of outlets. I am linking their website below, so you can go and look and see what they do. And if there's something where you have something finished and you just have no idea where to send it, you can send it to them, and they'll find a home for it. All right. Next, this also came in the bag, and there's a ton of yarn to go with this. This is acrylic squares that are crocheted. Half double, I think. No, single crochet. Yeah, these are just single crochet squares. There's actually a needle to sew them together. That's nice. Let's see. I'm sorry I didn't count these before. 3, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a lot. I showed this before, and she's also got partially done, and a double crochet strip, which is also being worked on. Okay, so who knows why this was done this way? I don't know what. Maybe she thought she'd give up on the squares and do a bigger thing, but there's tons of this yarn left. So this is lower priority, this one, than the ones I've shown you so far. But at some point I will put this together. And these squares are too big to send to Warm Up America. They are specific about, if you're going to send squares, send us 7x9 squares. So this one will get done eventually. And then I do have one that is my blanket. This is the Mitered Crosses blanket by Kay Gardner, and she is of Modern Daily Knitting. She has knit these out of, I think this is Noro Silk Garden. So if you want to have a silk garden blanket, you can do that. I am knitting mine out of acrylic. And like I said, Hands Across America, or Warm Up America, requires these to be machine washable. Their blankets. So I'm using a variegated Vanna's Choice, I think, in the middle, and then beige around the outside. And it's interesting, I have this in various stages. These are finished. And then here is the beginning of one that's just the mitered square where you go from the outside in, and at some point you stop and start with the beige, and then you pick up and do another mitered square and another until you get 4 of them put together like that. And then you start doing a border, a log cabin border, where you pick up and knit a certain number of ridges around the outside. And then you have this measures out 13 by 13. So the way they have the way these are arranged, it's kind of hard to see this, but can you see that? They do row of 3 and then a row of 2 with some extra garter stitch on the edge to sort of let them be offset from one another. I'm not sure I'm going to do that, but I am going to go ahead and try to finish 10 of them, 10 or 12 of them, and then figure out how to sew them together. This is 10. It just depends. I have a ton of this gray, but I don't have a ton of this variegated. So whatever I can get out of that. And so that one, this blanket, I really hope I get to work on this one by Easter. It's going to depend on how long it takes me, particularly to finish that feather and fan. But this one is for someone in the family. I don't know who yet, but I know who's going to want to grab it. Okay, so that's 4 blankets. Yeah. Well, this one's a lower priority. So the top one is to get the one mailed to the lady who actually made a generous donation to Stitch and Go to get this finished. So this is first, then feather and fan, then I'll work on mitered crosses, and then maybe if there's time, work on the one that has a ton of yarn, and that might wait till next Lent 2026. So I want to talk about my favorite blanket pattern, which I would also love to cast on at some point this year. That it's now that I've looked at all this, it's probably not going to happen this year. But I knit this blanket twice, It is a paid pattern. I think it's like under $7, but it is paid. It's called Gakoko. Gakoko Baby Blanket by Mini Me, Minimi. And I hope you can see this. It is knits, purls, and yarn overs. And then the wrong side is purl across. And it actually, that's what it looks like when you knit it top to bottom to top, whatever. That's the orientation of the knitting. It is something that I have knit twice. It is such a bang for the buck in terms of work because you are purling back. It is you can knit it one of two ways. The gimmick of it is it is designed so that you can knit it in squares and sew them together, and the squares will line up, and the yarn overs will line up, and it's got a very defined ridge in it. If you knit these little lace squares, they will line up, and so that you can make a baby blanket with 9 squares, and then as your child grows, you can add squares to it and make a twin blanket and make a king blanket and whatever. However, as your child grows, you can add to it. That to me, as I said, by the time a child gets to college, the acrylic is not going to feel the same as it did when you first knit it. So what I do, and there is an option with this blanket to do a seamless version. And I think I cast on, this one says 135 stitches. I think I added an extra repeat. So I think I did 157. I think that's right. It's 22 stitch, might be 158. It's a 22 stitch repeat. But it is all knits and purls, and it looks like cabling, and it looks ornate, and you purl back the wrong side, and it just zooms along. And you can memorize the chart. The chart is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 6 rows on the right side. It's a 11 row because there's a knit across in between these eyelets. But it is quick. And it looks fantastic when you finish it. And so I've linked that one below. If you like knitting blankets, this one is spectacular when finished. And I'm going to hold it right. There we go. It's spectacular when finished. And I would really like to knit it again. That's my favorite blanket pattern. Just because for the amount of work you do on it, it looks like you did an amazing thing. All right. Madame Defarge. I am going to read from a book that I have on my Kindle, but I'm going to read an excerpt that is published at LitHub. And I have the link below to the excerpt. It is from a book called, that I printed this out. This is The Power of Knitting, Stitching Together Our Lives in a Fractured World by Loretta Napoleoni. And this is about Madame Lafarge and knitting in times of revolution. Let's start here. I discovered the true language of knitting when I was reading A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I was 10 or 11 years old at the time, and I had been knitting for a few years. My father had bought me a collection of classic books, which I devoured and discussed with my grandmother as we knitted together. That's quite a heritage you have there. She had read them all, remembered all the stories, had so many insights about both the facts and the fiction. This woman, Madame Defarge, my grandmother said to me one day as she knit a bed cover for her goddaughter's wedding. Do you really believe she existed and encoded in her knitting the names of the aristocrats who were beheaded? Of course I believed it. Charles Dickens, one of my favorite authors, had said it was so. My grandmother shook her head. To what purpose? She continued. For revenge, I said, because the French aristocracy had oppressed the people for so long, had abused its powers, and the revolution brought justice to the masses. Madame Defarge is a fictional character created to symbolize the brutality of the revolution, of any revolution, through the dehumanization of those involved in it, my grandmother said. It does not tell you the real story of the tricoteuses, the French women who sat and knit in front of the guillotine. Wow, I thought in excitement. There is more to the story than I have read. And so she began one of her master history lessons. In the second half of the 18th century, she told me, market women in Paris were the backbone of society. They worked, traded, administered their husbands' meager salaries, looked after the kids, clothed their families with their knitting and sewing, and made ends meet. They were the barometers of social stability. When they realized they had no more bread to feed their families, they rebelled. They marched on Versailles, demanding bread because they were hungry. That was the spark that started the French Revolution. Years later, while taking a course on the French Revolution at university, I discovered that those women had become heroines in people's eyes. They created groups presided over by women such as Renée Adu, Agnes Lefebvre, Marie-Louise Bourgeois, and Rose Lacombe, similar to the Jacobin Club, which was one of the most radical movements of the Revolution, headed by Robespierre. Well, he wasn't a very nice guy, was he? These courageous women walked the streets of Paris, insulting whoever they thought was wealthy and encouraging the revolutionaries to arrest them. They were invited to observe the National Convention, the first assembly to govern France during the Revolution, which formally abolished the monarchy. My grandmother continued the knitting history lesson. Soon she said the revolutionary government felt threatened by these women, by their political role, rising power, and popularity within the revolution. The market women may have been the spark of the revolution, but its management was firmly in the hands of men who became increasingly authoritarian. So it was decided that the women could not sit in the gallery during meetings of the National Convention, and eventually they were forbidden to participate in any political assembly. But the women did not give up on being part of this process they had started. Some of them moved to the Place de la Revolution, today known as the Place de la Concorde, where the executions took place. They brought chairs from their market stalls and miserable homes and placed them around the guillotine. Then sat all day watching their enemies getting their heads severed from their bodies, and they brought their knitting. The revolutionary government was helpless to stop them. The square was a public place, and people were encouraged to witness the executions, so no one could ask the market women to move. Being accustomed to trade, the women started to sell their seats to people who wanted to watch the executions of specific individuals. They also knit various garments, socks, mittens, and scarves, which they sold after the executions. But mostly they knit the red bonnets de la liberté, liberty caps, that became one of the symbols of the French Revolution, worn by everyone in Paris. Renting their own chairs, and selling the items they knit proved to be a good business for the market women, even more profitable than their traditional trade. This was a blessing because during the Revolution, it was harder for people to make even a meager living. Remarkably, the market women were able to support their families with their knitting. The Liberty cap I discovered in school is a copy of an ancient hat, the Phrygian cap, Phrygian cap, which originated in Anatolia. Marianne, the symbolic figure who embodies liberty, equality, and fraternity, the motto of the French Revolution, is always depicted as wearing this red cap. As usual, my grandmother's interpretation of historical events, especially when knitting was involved, had a unique twist. Dickens wrote that the market women knit as a substitute for eating and drinking, a totally nonsensical conclusion, according to her. When you are almost starving, as the people of Paris were at the end of the 18th century, nothing can replace a loaf of bread, not even knitting. I must confess that as a child, I found the idea that the tricoteuses knit while watching people die deeply disturbing. Associating knitting with a violent act was not possible. It did not make any sense. It was my grandmother who explained to me why knitting came to be linked with the beheading of the French aristocrats. The market women knit during meetings of the assembly, she said, and they knit as the heads of the aristocrats rolled into the basket at their feet, all for a simple reason. They always knit. Knitting was a part of their lives, just like breathing and working. It was a required activity. The tricoteuses had to keep busy all the time. Even when they were entertaining themselves with their revenge over the aristocrats, they had to be productive, and they had to knit piecework in order to eat. By the way, she added, none of them knew how to read or write, so they could not have encoded the names of executed aristocrats in their knitting, as Dickens claimed they had. Dickens was right. Let me read this last little bit. Dickens was right in one thing, Grandma said. Knitting is the language that only knitters understand. You can knit anything into your pattern, a name, a story, a prayer, a poem. Then she showed me how she had knit her wisdom about marriage into the wedding blanket she was making for her granddaughter. She took my finger and guided it over the pearls and stitches in a corner of the blanket and read out the words hidden there. Love is a daily victory and a lifetime treasure. Isn't that interesting? So, again, the book is The Power of Knitting, Stitching Together Our Lives in a Fractured World by Loretta Napoleon. And I'm going to be reading more of it off my Kindle and if I find something else good. But Madame Lafarge, you know, as a character, you know, she lost her mind because the aristocrats had raped her sister, murdered her brother. You know, just people had died and been suffered terribly because of the aristocrats, and she kept punishing the family of this aristocracy, even though the one family member that she really wanted to kill had renounced his title and recognized that what he was doing was unjust. And so he was reforming and a reformer, and she couldn't let it go because of all the suffering that she'd had. And Dickens was absolutely talking about she went too far. She was not a sane person. She is the villain of this story. But at the same time, there is behind that story the tremendous suffering and the injustice, and how you could lose your mind with all the injustice that Madame Lafarge faced. She got a bad rap. So the illiteracy of that group of women who knit to eat. They did need to eat. That's an interesting twist. That of course Dickens had to have the names of the dead aristocrats hiding in her knitting. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be getting started with the Lenten blankets. And like I said, it's really just a set aside time to get some work done that's been sitting in the closet for a while, and a defined time to work on some things that I wouldn't otherwise work on. And I hope that you will be inspired to go through your UFO pile and find a blanket and work on it between now and Easter. It's just a nice set aside time to do that. All right, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.